Good evening. 6 years in, and he can still leave you speechless. Our fifth story on the countdown: President Bush was not speechless. He was already rehearsing the one he will give tomorrow night. This was yesterday, even as he was meeting with congressional leaders and telling them, quote, "I think it's very important before I make up my mind that I consult with the leaders of the House and the Senate." Here's your consultation. We hope you enjoyed your consultation. Not only had the president's response to the conclusions of General Petraeus been written at the latest, the day after the president had supposedly first become aware of those conclusions, but at the time rehearsals for the speech began and the congressional consultation was supposedly being conducted, General Petraeus and Ambassador Crocker were still giving their assessment to senators on Capitol Hill. The same assessment, Mr. Petraeus insisted, was not shared with anyone, including the president, till Monday morning. Democrats were swift to come out today against the president's proposal to bring back the 30,000 troops, offering legislation to bring troop levels lower than pre-surge levels, and pointing out that what is being portrayed by the administration as a troop reduction was not only already scheduled, but was also pretty much inevitable given the length of deployments, an assertion General Petraeus both acknowledges and denies.
The surge forces were scheduled to go home between April and mid-July. That is absolutely right. But, you know, again, I could have requested more surge forces. We certainly could have run it much longer, again, than, as I said, I've requested.
More on that military assessment with Paul Rieckhoff in a moment, and Senator Chris Dodd joins us here. First, the administration's spin. Tony Snow spending his last live news briefing trying to sell the surge as successful and the troop reduction as a result of that success, and the war is not open-ended despite the fact that there is technically no end in sight.
To say that you don't know when a war is going to end doesn't mean that you don't think it's going to end. You don't know when the war is going to end because you don't know when the war is going to end. You don't have a crystal ball. There's an attempt to say, if you don't have the crystal ball and you can't tell us when you're going to leave, it's an open-ended commitment. April.
Tony. Question, Tony, about the open-ended commitment.
Yes, I am, Bill. It's a verbal game. It is a verbal game.
I don't think so.
Okay, Bill, can you tell... Again, yes, you do. You absolutely understand it's a verbal game, simply because if I can't give you an absolute date, you just find it's an open-ended commitment.
For an absolute date,
yes, you are.
I'm asking you if this is an open-ended commitment.
And I've just made the point to you.
Isn't it an open-ended commitment if we're going to stay until the job is done?
Because the job will get done.
And his job now done, the outgoing press secretary may have inadvertently bolstered the Democrats' argument for a change in strategy in Iraq.
You have shifting realities at all times, and you respond to changing facts on the ground. The idea that you have an unchanging strategy, only a crazy person would fail to adjust strategy on a regular basis based on the realities on the ground.
Let's turn to our own Craig Crawford, columnist for Congressional Quarterly. Craig, good evening.
Doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome, Einstein's definition of insanity.
Only a crazy person would fail to adjust strategy on a regular basis. President Bush failing to adjust his strategy on a regular basis? Because he adjusts it, but it's always the same one he had before.
Tactics change, Keith, but the strategy of keeping American troops in a combat role in the middle of a civil war is a strategy that has not changed, Surge or not, or Petraeus or not. And that, I think, is what it's really getting boiled down to on Capitol Hill, is this combat role for U.S. troops in this civil war. Changing that is what Congress now, I think, might get focused on doing.
As the general acknowledged, these 30,000 troops were slated to come home anyway. The president always said this was supposed to be a short-term measure, the surge. So just how is he planning on selling an already planned withdrawal, a mandatory withdrawal because of the size of the military and the length of the deployments and the question of stretching it out too thin? How is he going to sell that tomorrow night as some kind of indicator of success on the ground?
Well, yeah, it's really a very small universe of people he needs to sell, or is even trying to sell, Keith, and that is about 6 to 8 Republicans in the Senate and maybe a baker's dozen or more House Republican lawmakers. These are the folks who are standing in the way of Democrat efforts to stop the war. They are the votes who sustain the president's veto. If they change their minds at any point along the way, that's when it all unravels for him. And as long as he keeps them in line, gives them political cover with this surge working, with sending Petraeus to the Hill, and they hold the line, he's in good shape.
There is a new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll tonight. 29% were worried that Congress would push too far for troop reductions, but more than twice that total, 64%, were more worried that the president will not make enough change on the ground to allow for troop withdrawals. This mounting public frustration, every set of numbers is a little bit bigger than the last one. Will it have any impact on the president's evident plan to keep status quo into 2009, to sort of force this on whoever succeeds him?
Only thing that will change this president's mind, I think it's painfully clear, is a change in those votes on Capitol Hill by Republicans. If he gets it in a situation where Democrats can get to the 60 they need in the Senate and the numbers they need in the House to override a veto, that is the only thing that's going to change him.
The Democratic proposal, the one that's being formulated now to get more troops back home faster, given their track record on this subject this year, does that new legislation have any chance of succeeding? Can they buy out, can they get out enough of those Republicans to come with them in the Senate?
I think they do have a pretty decent strategy here that might have a chance, in that the new buzz phrase I've been hearing on the Hill, Keith, is mission transition. Adjust the mission as opposed to setting withdrawal timetables. In other words, get troops out of combat, emphasize force protection, counterterrorism training, and not this combat role in this civil war. And that is something many Republicans are interested in. What's good about it, constitutionally speaking, is Congress is in a better place to talk about changing a mission than fiddling with the tactics for executing a mission. And that is where it seems like a change in language, but it could be more than that. And of course, the real crunch is going to come in whether this legislation, whether Democrats can get any kind of firm timetables for withdrawal and bring those Republicans over. But right now, I think they have a good shot, at least in the Senate, of getting the votes they need for something that's more about mission transition than withdrawal timetables.
So we're looking for a bipartisan mission transition coalition. Our own Craig Crawford of Congressional Quarterly. Great, thanks, Craig.
Good to be here.